Apple just released the iPhone Pocket. And it makes me angry, so let's talk about it. It was created in collaboration with the designer Issei Miyake, which I'm probably pronouncing wrong, I apologize, I'm an American. The long one is $230, the short one is $150, and it's limited edition, so it's only available in a few cities in small quantities. But if you really want one and you don't have the means to get one right now, dupes are going to show up in fast fashion in about 5 minutes because this is nothing special. Apple talks about this like it's something revolutionary, but external pockets have been a thing forever. Every historical costumer and hobbyist has made one of these, and there are a million videos, take your pick. But what really bothers me is that they call this 3D knitted, and it's not. Like, not even close. I have some internet friends who work with industrial knitting machines, and we sat down and dissected this thing to figure out how it was made, and it's very basic. This is not ribbing, it's knit sideways. The curled over part is the purl side and the lower part is the knit side, and then it's got eyelets in the knit section, and that's it. It was knit sideways with like a space for the handle thing. And the structure of the whole thing is just the way that knits behave. It's that thing that now deleted SciShow video was trying to explain. I'll link to the paper, it's got a better explanation. And yes, my recreation of that video is coming soon. I'm working on getting some samples knit on a local industrial machine, so stay tuned for that. And all of this bothers me because I took a look at the designer's work, and it's a lot of like interesting pleating and draping that makes geometric structures that are still kind of organic. And with all of that inspiration, this is what they came up with. I mean, the only thing that really ties it to the original designer is the color palette. They could have done something so much more interesting with the technology currently available, and especially at Apple's price points, it wouldn't be a big deal to use more interesting manufacturing equipment. But anyway, we're gonna make one. This is my Brother 910 vintage standard gauge electronic knitting machine. It's older than I am, and these aren't manufactured anymore, but you can still find them secondhand on the internet. I have a buying guide if you want to get into machine knitting. I'll link that in the description. Now, normally knitting machines can only knit in one direction. You get purl stitches and that's it. But this knitting machine and most industrial knitting machines are double bed. That means you can knit in both directions and make things like ribbing. Industrial machines can automatically transfer stitches from one bed to the other to go back and forth between knitting and purling, but on domestic machines you have to do that manually. And I could do that manually, but instead I have a garter carriage. This is a garter carriage. It's a little robot that walks itself across the bed and reforms purl stitches into knit stitches. And there's one more piece to this whole puzzle, AYAB. This is open source hardware and software that replaces my machine's original electronics and lets me control the whole thing from my computer. This is open source and I work on it. There will be more links in the description. I've already done some swatching for this. The gauge of my pocket is going to be different than the original because I'm working with a standard gauge machine that has about 7 needles per inch. I'm guessing the machines that Apple worked with were about 12, which is fairly common in industrial machines. But here it is. We have this curved part is the knit side, and then the lower section is knit, and I'm doing these eyelets by hand. This machine does have a lace carriage and can do transfers automatically if you set it up correctly, but for various reasons it's hard to switch between the lace carriage and the garter carriage that I have set up, so I'm just doing this by hand. It's faster. All right, let me get set up and show you how all of this works. So first I've cast onto waste yarn, and I'm going to finish the edge later. I've done the math on my swatch to figure out how long this needs to be for the short pocket. And while it's on the machine, it's going to be all kinds of stretched out and not look the way it's going to look when it's finally washed and blocked. So we have to do the math beforehand. Garter carriage is set up. We have the yarn threaded in, and I need to change this to, what is it? It's 7 rows? 8. So this row counter here counts down, and when it stops, I know I need to stop and do my eyelets. So I've set this up so it knits just enough rows until we get to the first round of eyelets. And then over here we have the tension mast. The garter carriage has its own power supply, and it sits in the tension mast, and it has a couple switches in here. This one here, if the yarn breaks, this will drop and fall and trigger the switch and turn the garter carriage off. And then back here we have a yarn knot sensor. If a knot gets caught in this, it'll pull up and trip the switch and stop the garter carriage. Then we have the power supply for the garter carriage that's currently plugged in. Lovely 80s technology. My interface is powered up. I have connection both to power and to my computer. And then here's the pattern I'm knitting. The white is purl stitches and the black is knit stitches, and that's about it. So let's get this started. And then I come over here and I start this. Everything's up and running. I'm gonna let this go. It's gonna take about 20 minutes until I get to the first round of eyelets because this thing's a little slow. We've reached the first row of eyelets. So we've got 7 rows of knit stitches and then 1 row of purl stitches, and it's time to put the eyelets in this. And I've already done a few over here. Let me bring them around here. So every 3 stitches here, I'm pulling a stitch off the bed, picking it up and transferring it over 1 needle. And then when the garter carriage comes back through, it'll pick up yarn on this needle and it'll leave a hole here. And of course, industrial machines can do this automatically, but I don't have one of those. I want one, but they can be expensive. Now the pattern repeats every 10 rows, so I'm going to set my row counter to 10, and this counts down, and then restart the whole thing. I have knit almost 4 repeats of the pattern here, and now it's time to do the separation for the handle, like right here. I can't put needles into hold with the garter carriage, so I need to remove it from the bed and switch back to the main carriage. And that means removing these rails that the carriage uses to walk across the bed. And the main carriage just slips back on. I've separated out my stitches. This section here that are all the way out is going to be like the top connection point. And then from here to this needle sticking out will be the center section. And I'm binding this off by hand. And then down here is going to be the part where the phone goes. I could take this off on waste yarn and it'd probably be a lot easier to do this bind off, but then I'd just put all the rest of it back on the machine and then line it up again. And I don't feel like doing that. The handle section is bound off. Let's pull these stitches off the machine. And to do that, push them all the way forward so the loops are past the latches. And then let me do this one so I don't go too far. And then I push them all back in. There we go, handle section is bound off. And we're just gonna leave these back here so they don't get in the way. We'll have to cast these back on later. Now we need to knit the purl section of the phone part. So we knit 1 row, and then I'm gonna do my transfers. Going this way. Oh, and then I looked at the original and it doesn't have the last eyelet on the section where the 2 halves join. So I'm gonna knit a couple more rows. Okay, and then that section is done for now. So let me cut this yarn. And now let's do the same thing for the top section. I finished my top and my bottom sections, and now I'm casting back on so we can restart the garter carriage process. And this is just an AYAB cast on. Here's where we are. So we have the knit section for the phone part and the top part, and then I recast on all of these stitches, and I had to manually knit a row because the garter carriage really doesn't function well when the needle butts are too far out. But this should be good, and I think I got all my weights ready to go. Let's restart the garter carriage. I didn't plug it in. Whoops! The knitting is done. Once again, I've sectioned off this whole piece into, this is the upper seam, this is where the phone's going to go, and then this is the metal pocket part, because this is double layer. The bottom's going to fold around, and then the parts will join here. But I'm binding off the center section the same way I was before, and then I'm going to knit the final bits of purl stitches on both of these ends and then join the whole thing off the machine. In manufacturing, these bind-offs would have been done by the knitting machine, and assembly would have been done on a linker, which is like a sewing machine for knits. But I tried a couple finishes on my linker and I wasn't happy with any of them. I haven't used my linker much, I'm not very familiar with it, so I'm going to do this all by hand because I know I can get a good finish by hand. All right, that's all the knitting for this section. I'm going to leave a long tail so I can sew this up later. And normally I would knit an additional row. No, I did this wrong. Hold on, I need to knit one more row. All right, now we're done. This is the last row, and there should be one more row here, but it's going to be formed when I seam it to the starting piece. So we're gonna We use waste yarn on knitting machines instead of something like a stitch saver because it's easier and faster than pulling stitches off onto something else. And there we go. And now I'm going to do the same thing for the top section. It's done. All of the seams are sewn and the ends are woven in, and it looks a little funky now because it was all stretched out when it was on the machine, both horizontally by the needles and then vertically by the weights. We have to put weights on the work while we're working on it to keep it in the right place against the machine because the machine's at an angle. But it's done. And like I said, my scale is going to be different than the one that Apple made because I have a different gauge machine than they used. But this is a Tamm acrylic yarn, and Tamm yarns are coated so that they go more smoothly through a knitting machine, and once this is washed, it'll be in its final form. But this is the part where I admit I don't have an iPhone. I have an Android phone. I've been an Android developer since college, so a long time, and I really don't like Apple's closed ecosystem. I'm only in this for the knitting, but let's see how my phone fits in this thing. I got a pop socket on it too, but it stretches. I chose how many rows and stitches based on the gauge that I got from my sample and also the dimensions given on the website. But again, this is not in its final form because it is not blocked yet. It's not washed yet, but hey, it's got the grid pattern effect going, so I want to say it's successful. All right, let me wash this and then I'll show you what it looks like when it's in its final form. here it is, fresh out of the wash. And I did steam it a little bit to get it to smooth out because acrylic does the crunkly thing. But let me put my phone in it. Come on. It's stuck on the pop socket. So there we go. An iPhone Pocket. This is just proof that you don't need to spend $150 on a limited edition Apple product. All you need is a few $1,000s worth of knitting machine equipment and then about 5 years of experience using it. And you even get to skip the steps that I had to take, where I had enough experience knitting things to understand how to reverse engineer this from a couple photos and like a decade of software development experience in order to get all of the carriages to work correctly with the software and the hardware. So you're way ahead of me. Like I said, I expect dupes to show up in fast fashion in about 5 minutes, though I guess it would take some time to set up a production pipeline, so maybe give them 10 minutes. So don't worry if you can't get one of these, you'll be able to get one soon. What do you think? Was it worth the effort? Would you buy one if they were available near you? Would you knit one by hand? Because if you had some tiny needles and a lot of time, you could do this by hand. I want to say thank you to channel members who make videos like this possible. If you'd like to become a channel member and support this channel, you can click the join button down below. All channel members get early access to new videos, and channel members at the mid-tier and higher get access to members-only videos. I've got a lot of behind-the-scenes things, and I talk about projects that almost happened but didn't. And most recently, I have a whole knit-along that's up. The knit-along is over by this point, but actually, there's still one more video, a show and tell at the end, that'll come out after this. But all the videos are still up there if you need a detailed walkthrough of some of my patterns. That's about it. Thanks for watching. Happy knitting. I need a thumbnail. If I put my wrist through this. If we did that. Gotta align it in there nicely. And the bottom's twisted. There we go. Or if I'm like just against one of the photos that Apple released. I'm skeptical. I'm skeptical about this whole thing, and I'm disappointed. I'm really disappointed that this is what they came up with. Okay, there's probably enough faces in there.